January 1999. David and Belinda Temple were expecting their second child. Belinda was due to give birth as soon as possible. The doctors predicted labor in a couple of weeks. Like all pregnant women, Belinda was tired very much and quickly, and she still had her son Evan, who also required attention and care. That day, David decided to relieve his wife from household chores and gave her some time for an evening rest. And so that she would not be distracted by anything, he and his son went for a walk in the park. Father and son were having fun. Walking in the fresh air quickly tires and whets the appetite, so after the walk they went to a cafe to eat a sandwich and drink a Coke. After the cafe, they drove home. David parked the car and noticed that the front door of his house had broken glass. "Evan, I'm going to take you to visit Harlan for a bit, okay?" said David, and without waiting for an answer from his son, quickly led him across the street to a neighboring house where family friends lived. "Why can't we go to Mom's?" asked the son, who could barely keep up with his father. "Mom's in the hospital right now." David couldn't think of anything else to say. Quentin Harlan had barely opened the door to the unexpected guests, and not even had time to say hello, before David took his son into the living room without speaking and ran toward his house. Quentin, not understanding anything, shouted to his wife to look after the child, and himself ran after his silent friend. "What's the matter?" Quentin shouted, but when he saw the broken front door of Temple's dwelling, he realized that David probably didn't know what was waiting for him inside. The house was a mess. All the closets were open, things were scattered on the floor, and worst of all, there were trails of blood on the floor that led to the stairs. Quentin pushed David aside and saw that under the stairs, in the dressing room, Belinda was lying belly down with her arms spread apart and a huge hole in the back of her head. David, apparently out of shock, did not even cry out, did not utter a word, did not rush to his wife's body, but immediately took out his cell phone and dialed the police number. The operator on the other end of the line didn't anticipate the brutality of the murder, so he asked David to check Belinda's pulse and even give her CPR. "What the hell kind of CPR are you talking about? Her head is splattered all over the walls." Police officers immediately rushed to the scene, except they didn't get inside the house for a long time. The Temple family's bull terrier, named Shaq, growled and barked at the unfamiliar uniformed men and seemed about ready to lunge at the police officers. One of the officers even drew his service pistol as David, who had come out of the house, yelled for them to put their guns away and hurriedly took the aggressive dog into the garage. Once inside the house where the tragedy had recently occurred, the police looked around and concluded that the burglars were at work here, who did not know that the mistress was in the house at that moment, and even though she was pregnant, they had no choice but to shoot her and thus get rid of the witness. 1986. Belinda gets a college education in her hometown. Even though her twin sister Brenda left to study at Steve Austin University, Belinda stayed with her parents because in high school, she started dating Marshall Kelmy, who was 3 years older than her and whom she was just crazy about. Her father and mother were against this relationship, at least because of her boyfriend, their daughter would not be able to get a prestigious education and, as it usually happens, would get pregnant early and end up dropping out of even a community college. On this topic, there were many scandals in their home. Carol's mother did not allow her daughter to start a joint life with Marshall, and dropped then such a phrase, "He is nobody to you. When you get married, you can move out anywhere, but until then, you have your own house." Belinda was a stubborn girl who always got her way, and she must have taken her mother's words as a wake-up call. Sometime later, at a family dinner, to which Marshall had been invited, despite the inhibitions, the young couple announced that they were to be married. There was a heavy silence at the table. "Well, now that they've decided," Mom gritted her teeth, and they spent the rest of the evening in complete silence. Belinda had actually made the decision herself, wanting to show her parents that she was an adult and capable of making her own decisions. Her boyfriend was not particularly eager for an official marriage, but did not refuse the proposal of his girlfriend, whether he did not want to offend or for some other reason. The two young people got married. No, there was no grand celebration. Belinda wore her sister's white dress, called a few friends, and she and Marshall signed, and then just walked around the city, drinking champagne and having fun. The very next day, Belinda packed her things and moved in with her husband, who at that time still lived with his parents and rent a separate place was not even planned. Official marriage, in fact, did not affect their relationship, and as already mentioned, Belinda did it all just to stop hearing motherly reproaches and become independent. But the taste of this life turned out to be very bitter. Not 6 months later, Marshall began to spend little time at home, saying he was working late, but was actually with another woman. Belinda found out when she noticed that her husband was acting strangely. One day she waited until his workday was over and followed her husband, and that's when it all came to light. Marshall was walking hand in hand with some strange woman, most likely with his colleague. The deceived wife did not organize any fights and jealousy scenes, but simply packed her things and returned to her mother. The guilty Marshall hung around the doorstep of her house for a long time, often calling on the phone, trying to beg her forgiveness, but Belinda was unshakable and too proud to forgive the young man. They were soon divorced. 1998. Belinda is already pregnant with her second child, but still works part-time at the school. The children listen to her half-heartedly, respect her for her fairness, and even a little afraid. Belinda herself is worried that because of her pregnancy, she will miss the basketball competition between schools, and she will not be able to prepare the team well, because her colleague, Richard Bachman, does not care about her team and children in general. He has confessed to her so many times that if he had another job, he would have given up being a teacher long ago. Belinda disliked this attitude and could not understand how this flabby and fat 40-year-old man was still in his position. Belinda was not one of those teachers who turned a blind eye to student absenteeism, so when she noticed that one of her students, high school senior Riley Joe Sanders, had been absent from class for months, she immediately reached out to her colleagues. She wanted to know if this was her problem as a teacher or if the boy was a systematic truant. Her colleagues answered that it was not her problem. The boy was brought up in a bad family, no one cared about him, and he appeared at school only rarely. Belinda couldn't leave it at that. That same evening, she visited his mother, who lived nearby, and had a serious talk with her, which later bore fruit. However, it wasn't quite what the young teacher had expected. Riley Joe Sanders came to class, practiced on an equal footing with the other students, but during a basketball game, when Sanders pushed his opponent and Belinda pointed out Riley's disgusting behavior, he insulted her with the last words and even said something like, "You'll answer to me for this. You better look around, especially in the evenings." 1987. After breaking up with Marshall, Belinda had nothing left to hold on to in her hometown. So she followed her sister to Stephen F. Austin State University. She loved her time at the university. It seems that she truly found her calling. In addition to studying, she works part-time as a basketball coach, and the young woman had high expectations. At the same university, she meets David Temple. He, like Belinda, is a part-time coach, but for soccer, and also plays for the university team as team captain. Soccer for David was an integral part of life. He practiced it since childhood, and even then it was clear that he would become a star. At school, he always successfully played for his team, for which he was respected by all teachers, even though David had a difficult character. He could easily insult anyone or even beat up, but he got away with it all. Being on the field during the game, he would start with half a turn, and then could not calm down for a very long time. Later, however, one of the players on his team said that David's aggressiveness is due to the fact that he takes steroids. With Belinda, David behaved completely differently, turned into a caring guy who literally could carry his queen in his arms. With one amendment, as soon as someone smiled in the direction of his beloved, as David immediately turned on and tried to clarify the relationship on the fists. Belinda also came to the taste, and David's parents, they literally idolized her. They really liked that she, as well as their son, crazy about sports, which means they have a lot in common. But her twin sister, and in principle Belinda's friends, from this union were, to put it mildly, not thrilled. The whole point is that before meeting David, they knew Belinda as a strong-willed and independent personality, and in this relationship, she changed a lot, became constrained, quiet, humble. It seemed that her whole life was built around pleasing David. In addition to all of this, being in this toxic relationship, Belinda became distant from her family. Calls to her parents became less and less frequent, and trips home, whether for vacations or weekends, stopped altogether. Who in the family could like this? Closer to graduation, the couple got themselves a bull terrier and named their pet, Shaq. And after receiving their long-awaited diplomas, David and Belinda got married. 1999. The police began to examine the crime scene. How could the burglar get into a house guarded by such a vicious dog? In fact, how could the perpetrator distract the bull terrier that prevented the police from making a step into the Temple yard? Then they turned their attention to the front door. The glass was broken, as if the perpetrator had tried to open the lock from the inside, but in that case, the shards of glass would have been near the threshold. But here they were in the distance, to the right of the entrance. So the glass was broken when the door was unlocked. Why would they do that? In the living room, there was a box on a nightstand, with a toppled TV lying on the floor beside it. The policeman opened it. Inside lay earrings, rings, a chain, in appearance resembling gold. Also not clear why the robber did not touch the jewelry. With each new minute spent inside the Temple family home, the police officers came more and more to the conclusion that everything that had happened inside resembled a dramatization. They knew from experience that in a robbery, the criminal takes absolutely everything he can find and carry away. And here, as it seems, nothing was even taken. And then there was that dog that wouldn't leave their minds. Something was clearly wrong here. As for the murder, the shot was fired in the back of the head, presumably with a 12-gauge shotgun, while the victim was kneeling with his back to the killer. That said, a shotgun is not considered a popular weapon among robbers. It's very difficult to carry or transport, and still not be seen. In Belinda's case, the murder was absolutely 4 o'clock in the afternoon. A criminal wouldn't be walking around with a shotgun in broad daylight. David, do you keep any weapons at home? Yeah, I have a couple of rifles. David showed his weapons to the police officers, but the shotgun that could have killed Belinda was not among them. The cops asked David to ride with them to the station to give a statement and take an inventory of the stolen items. The man was very nervous, but nevertheless went with the police officers. His son Evan, who did not yet know what had happened, stayed at Harlan's house. 1996. David Temple and Quentin Harlan, in addition to being neighbors, worked at the same school. You could say that they were real friends. They often met outside of work hours, to watch games on TV together or have a family barbecue. One day, David and Quentin were brought together by something else besides their love of sports. There was a new young teacher at the school, Heather Scott. Quentin immediately paid attention to her, gave all sorts of signs of attention, and one day even invited her to an evening dinner, but Heather refused him. It so happened that Quentin had a rival, and this rival, surprisingly, turned out to be David. Quentin was beyond angry and resentful that his married friend, who even has a son, was building a secret relationship at work. You have to hand it to Quentin. He was a good friend and could keep a secret. Heather did not even suspect about David's marital status, since he did not wear a wedding ring and did not tell anything about his real life. Moreover, outside the walls of the school, David and Heather behaved like a happy couple, and it was noticed by the whole teaching staff of the school. Belinda knew nothing about David's second life. Once she talked to Quentin and revealed to him that she suspected her husband of cheating, but Quentin, of course, dissuaded the suffering wife. You have a vivid imagination. David is your husband and a great family man. How could you think such a thing? And there was much to think about. If David had previously been extremely reverent towards Belinda, now he could afford to insult his wife even in front of other people, such as, for example, he often called her fat, although after childbirth she only a little weight gain, asked to go to another room when there were guests in the house, as if she scares them with her untidy appearance, and so on. Belinda, instead of having a serious talk with her husband on the subject, accepted this attitude toward herself, but cried at night, and felt deeply unhappy as a woman. In parallel, all the while, David was enjoying his new relationship with Heather. 1999. The police suspected David, but they couldn't prove anything. But flipping through the case files of burglaries in the neighborhood, they learned that 8 days before the murder at the Temple house, a house on the next street had been burglarized, and the perpetrator was Riley Joe Sanders. Yes, the same persistent truant from the school where Belinda taught and who had threatened her. He was immediately called in for questioning. Riley had no alibi on the day of the murder, and besides, his father had a shotgun, just a 12-gauge. But when they searched the Sanders house, no weapon was found. When the high school student realized that the police had every reason to detain him, he confessed that on the day of the murder of the teacher, he was with friends, and hid it only because he was with a large group of people smoking pot and did not want to frame others with his testimony. The charge against Riley was dropped. 1998. Because of a new relationship with a coworker, David became further and further estranged from his family. His psychological pressure on his wife grew steadily. He never once raised his hand at her, but all their communication consisted only of insults. It was during this year that Belinda learned that she was pregnant again. This news made her forget about all the past offenses against David, and she felt over the moon. David seemed to be trying to act like a happy father too, but it wasn't working. Sometimes David did not even come home at night, and Belinda was afraid to ask what was the reason for his absence at night, because her husband could get very angry and make a real scandal. A pregnant woman did not want that. Belinda often asked David to help her prepare for the birth of the baby, to go to the store for things, to make repairs in the new children's room, to install shelves on the walls. David ignored all of his wife's requests, and Belinda, although she was in a position, began to do everything on her own. To go shopping, paint the walls, assemble the purchased furniture. David made no effort at all. Christmas was coming. Belinda was already 8 months pregnant. She decided to discuss with her husband what they would give each other, but David suggested that they should not give gifts together this year, and that the money saved would be better spent on the baby that was about to be born, especially since the doctors had warned the expectant mother that she might go into premature labor and the baby might be born before the new year. Christmas came. Although the spouses had agreed not to give each other anything, David never gave Belinda anything, not even a nice little thing. Moreover, he suddenly packed his things and said that all the New Year's holidays will spend with friends on the hunt. Belinda told her sister about it, and she dropped all her plans to come to her so that Belinda would not feel abandoned. And as the doctors warned, labor could begin at any moment. David, of course, wasn't on any hunting trips with his friends. He spent the holidays with Heather, whose neck was decorated with a gold necklace, a gift from Temple for Christmas. 2007. It seemed that David Temple has almost forgotten about the murder of his wife, as if in his life no Belinda Temple had never been. He did not care about the fact that from the moment of the murder has passed 5 years, and the culprit has not been found. He married Heather in 2001, and the two of them raised Evan, but back in 2004. In November, there was a knock on his door. On the doorstep stood police officers who, handcuffing David, informed him that he was being held on suspicion of the murder of Belinda Temple. David, as before, denied everything. David's trial did not begin until 2007. According to the investigation, the motive for the crime was his new love affair with Heather. Interviewed colleagues of David said that more than once during Belinda's pregnancy, heard him bragging about how he easily exchanged his fat and pregnant wife for a young and beautiful Heather. According to the prosecution's version, David killed Belinda immediately after she came home from work because the young woman was found in her work uniform and work shoes. He then initiated the robbery by throwing things around the house and quickly drove to the park with his son, which provided an alibi. The prosecution also added such facts that nothing was stolen from the house, and there was a vicious dog in the yard that would not let any stranger into the house. The murder weapon was probably dropped by David in the rice paddy, as there were witnesses who saw David's car stopped near the paddy, and only Evan was in the car at the time. However, the shotgun was never recovered in that area. Heather's testimony was that before the murder of Belinda, their relationship with David was not considered serious, and she did not even love him. These words Temple certainly did not like and introduced confusion into the jury's decision. Could David kill his wife for the sake of a non-serious relationship? Or Heather is lying, trying to save her husband in this way? In November 2007, David was sentenced to life in prison. 2009. A friend of Riley Sanders goes to the police to clear his conscience. From his words then, a few years ago, Riley told him how he took his father's shotgun with the intention of robbing the Temple family home, and thereby teaching his teacher a lesson about his mother's truancy at school. And he really almost managed to enter the house, but at that moment, a bull terrier ran out of the garage, and Riley shot at the dog, but did not hit, and afraid that the sound of shotgun fire would attract the neighbors, quickly ran away from there. This testimony was submitted to the court. A review of the case began. In the meantime, David was released from prison on bail. Heather had no intention of being the wife of a man who had spent so much time in jail and was not sure how much longer he would spend in jail. She filed for divorce. It took the jury a long time to decide what kind of punishment David deserved. It was when Temple was free, and the court had not yet decided his sentence that the pandemic began. It wasn't until 2023 that the case was revisited. David was found guilty after all. He was sentenced to life in prison with parole after 17 years. His son Evan, while the trial was going on until the last moment, did not believe that his father was capable of such a cold-blooded murder, and throughout the trial, supported him to the last moment.